We talked about cryptids, creatures that have not been proven to exist, but there's a subclass within cryptids called crawlers. Crawlers are pale humanoid creatures that typically have something off about them. It could be joints that bend the wrong way, the fact that some are incredibly tall, can sprint on all fours, or a combination of all of these factors. All in all, seeing one can be a massively frightening experience. So hi most amazing fam, I'm your host Abby, and today I'm bringing you the top 10 scary crawler sightings. At number 10, we have something in the grove. SVX files on Reddit and some friends would hang out and explore a local small grove by them in Minnesota. They made up monsters that lived there by the abandoned sheds for the local kids, but they ended up having some weird experiences of their own later on. As they entered the grove on one of their visits, the air got cold. They all got chills. They heard twigs snapping and cans would fly from the sheds. And then on another visit, they ended up sprinting back down the path to get to a streetlight after it chased them, they wrote. And then on another night, something was standing on the tops of the trees across from them, across the grove, but it was right next to them after one of the friends yelled at it and they turned around and came back. What chased them, the guy who wrote it described as 7 to 8 feet tall, stark white and bipedal, but could run on all fours. So was this a crawler? That's what they're asking. At number 9, we have seen on the side of the road. Ruby Burr on Reddit posted that he saw something that could be a crawler on the side of the road. Him and his friend were driving home when they saw what they thought was a person standing on the side of the road. It was standing absolutely still as they drove by. It stood 6 to 6.5 feet tall and was pale. Not like me, but more pale. It was hunched over in tattered clothes with stringy long hair. But something was off about it. Its knees were bent the opposite way, it had black pits for eyes and no noticeable mouth. He thought it was maybe just a figment of his imagination, but when he turned to the driver of the car, her face was just as shocked and filled with fear as his was. They sped up and didn't look back, though he said later that he wished he did just to see if it was real. On to number 8, crawling out of the bushes. Another user on Reddit shared their own story, and they have actually gone on to make their own subreddit called the Sunshine Commission in order to demystify crawlers. Their own scariest experience was when they were letting their dog out at 2 a.m. As their dog was doing their business, they took a look around. They lived in a rural area in Quebec near the forest, so they saw a number of wild turkeys and deer. But something else caught their eye. A dark spot. It looked like a human head coming out of the bushes, but they didn't have a good view because of the lack of light. So they called their dog back so it wouldn't run after whatever this creature was, but the dog wasn't in the hurry. You know dogs, they just do what they want. But then the creature began to leave the shadows and head towards the street, and so they got a good look at it. It looked like a human with thin limbs, but a normal body and a slightly longer neck. So they shook a treat cup for their dog to hurry up and get inside and then ran and shut the door behind them. They watched as the creature crawled fast, saying it looked like a dog running with every limb broken, and it had no fur like a shaved animal. They described it as disgusting, an experience they did not want to have again. So that same user had another story, this time with creepier sounds. At number 7, the screams. So a couple months after the first encounter, they were chilling in bed watching gaming videos on their phone. They were getting annoyed with a recurring distant scream that they thought was coming from the video. But while they waited for another video to load, the scream happened again. From their window, they could hear the scream they described as a mix between a distorted scream and a pig having his throat slit, or a strong pain of whining from a dog. Out their window, they could see a human-sized creature move unbelievably fast through a pool of light there, and it was crawling like a spider. There were 3 more screams after that before it stopped. At number 6, out camping. Gray's 1974 was out camping in Minnesota last year with his wife and daughter. At their campsite, their tent faced a river. You know, quite picturesque. But as he was setting up a campfire to boil water for dinner, something caught his eye. Across the river, something was walking through the forest. No, not Sasquatch. It was something tall with incredibly skinny limbs. Someone shouted at a neighboring campsite, and the creature looked over at him. He was shocked as its pale, bulbous head locked eyes with him across the river. Then it got down on all fours and crawled away at an incredible speed in the opposite direction. He did not get a good night's sleep that night. And then they left the next day because he was like, we are not dealing with this. No, it's a no from me. Number 5, crawler stalker. The redditor Carissa has been visited by a weird pale skinny thing all of their life, they say. It makes weird chirping noises and taps on their covers. At this point, they were sleeping completely under the covers as a fearful 7-year-old. One day when they had fallen asleep with their face out, they finally got a good look at what was doing this. It was 7 feet tall, super thin, with empty voids for eyes. They were frozen in shock, but it just moved around the room, looking around. It visited them more as a kid, but still, every once in a while they hear chirping and feel the tapping that signals its presence. They still sleep under the covers. Just block it out. While they don't think it's malevolent, it does scare the out of them. Number 4, through the bushes. So this was a person out for a smoke break on a porch, and this was in South Carolina. So as they smoked and played on their phone, they heard a loud bang sound. So they looked up at the fence at the top of the hill in their friend's backyard, but they couldn't really see much because there were bushes in the way. But then one of the bushes rustled and a humanoid pale creature crawled out. They described it as human looking but animalistic in the weirdest way. Its legs were long and its skin was pale. It looked like a mix of a dog and an extremely thin person. They quickly put out the cigarette and went inside. So the next day, the host of that gathering said he found that one of the boards of his wooden fence was broken, right behind the bush that the creature came out of. So it did happen, it wasn't just something that they saw. Number 3, hopping fences. So a woman who sleeps in the living room of her house since the other rooms are usually taken. A woman who sleeps in the living room of her house since the other rooms are taken usually spent her time outside on the porch, her own little space. Her backyard is pretty long and connects to an alleyway. So one night she was sitting on her porch, as she does, and she sees something standing in the alley. She told her kid later that it was a human figure, completely white and about 6.5 feet tall. It hopped their back fence with ease and started sprinting at her, disappearing a couple feet from the porch window. Once she unfroze from shock, she ran to the kitchen where her kid was and grabbed a knife from the sink, looking out the back door for the creature. Her kid was obviously a little bit confused, but understood the story once it was explained to her. On to number 2, climbing crawler. So SOKE1315 responded to a post with her own crawler sighting. For some context, she has an elevated back enclosed screen porch. So if someone walks past, usually only their top of head peeks over. Anyways, she had friends over and she was another person smoking a cigarette on her porch. She knew what different animals' footsteps sounded like from over the years and then heard something different from the usual. She felt dread but fought to convince herself every time she heard it that it was just a deer. Just a deer. So she moved from leaning on a post by the screen to the door into the house so that she could look out at the woods and not have, her back to whatever was happening. So the footsteps continued moving back and forth. She put out her cigarette and tossed it towards the ashtray by the screen, and then the thing that she had been hearing ran up to the screen, pressing its face right up to it. It had to be tall, maybe 8 feet, since she could see its chest up from the porch. It was humanoid with a bald head and dark eyes. It was abnormally pale white. It looked distorted and she couldn't make out other human features like ears. She booked it inside and her friend fell over in her chair as she saw it too. The group of friends then heard something on the roof. So they locked all entrances and huddled on the couch with knives out waiting for the police. They told them they feared they had an intruder as they were afraid the police wouldn't come if they told the truth of what they saw. And yes, another person huddling with a knife. Defend yourself. On to, last but not least, number 1, not the chickens. So in rural Missouri, Juggernaut 980 said that they had many experiences in what he thought was a forest school. His family had chickens in a coop when he was young, but something kept killing them. It would be fine for the first couple of months, but then something would tear open the wired fencing of the caged area and they would find 1 or 2 chickens torn up laying in the yard. His parents said, yeah, it's just wolves, wild dogs or something. So his mom was the one who wanted the chickens, so there were 4 or 5 years where they would get batches of chickens only for them all to die. So then his mom gave up. She took those years off, but then when her son was in senior year, she wanted to try again. It was, again, good at first. But then the chickens were getting killed again. And this time, whatever it was killing them wasn't tearing through the fence, but peeling off the wire roof. Kinda hard for dogs. This was a 5 to 6 foot high cage, and the dad's old excuse of wild dogs just wasn't enough of an explanation anymore. So then one night, after driving his sister home from a party, he pulled into the yard next to the driveway. They were facing the chicken coop and his sister just started screaming. He described what he saw as if it was Gollum from Lord of the Rings sitting on top of the chicken coop. Pale white with thin hair on the top of its head, red eyes that glowed in the headlight of the car, and it was hissing at them. He locked the car and flashed the brights and honked the horn, and it ran off into the woods. Their parents didn't believe them until a couple days later. Their dad heard the chickens screeching and went out with a gun to shoot the wild dogs. He came back white as a ghost and refused to talk about what he saw. Probably the same thing his children did. Yes. And that is top 10 scary crawler sightings. I've heard that they are possibly cave dwellers due to a pattern of where sightings take place, but tell me what you know down below. While you are down there, be sure to give us a like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when we post. I've been your host, Abby, and until next time, keep an eye out. Bye.